Welcome to the Cyber Sangha podcast. Cyber Sangha is a program of free live broadcasts, launched in 2009 by renowned teacher and author Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche. Join us as we draw on ancient Tibetan wisdom to discover how to connect with our best self and live to our highest potential. The following conversation, Self-Transcendence, Dissolving Pain, Overcoming Addiction, happened on February 24th, 2022 as a science and spirituality dialogue with Eric Garland, Fadel, Zeidan, David Vago, Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, and Alejandro Chaoul-Reich. This was part of a year-long series, A Year of Body, Speech, and Mind. This content is for informational purposes only. Listeners should consult medical professionals for any physical or mental health concerns. Please use headphones and do not meditate while driving or operating machinery.
Welcome, everyone, to another panel on Cyber Sangha. Before we start the panel and introduce the wonderful speakers that we have, as we heard the news of Russia invading Ukraine, we wanted to sit together for a minute in silence. As our heart goes to everyone in Ukraine and we sit together, I couldn't be in a better place than to be with all of you and sitting with Rinpoche and with you and with everyone who's sitting together in Cyber Sangha, having a moment to be together. And for those of you who are coming for the first time to Cyber Sangha, welcome. Cyber Sangha is exactly that. It's a space for the community that wherever we are, we could be together. We could be together practicing, we could be together discussing, and we could be together. And this is really the main part of Rinpoche founding Cyber Sangha. And thank you, Rinpoche, for founding this space and all these different events. And for people, we've been doing for a year, we've been working with different full moons. Every full moon we meet and we pass the baton around the world. So we start in the US, we pass it to Finland, we go to Spain, we go to all over the world. So you're welcome to join every full moon with us. Also, Rinpoche does different teachings at different times. And we've done this for a whole year and extended it until the Tibetan New Year, which is coming up in March 3rd. And we've been doing body, speech, and mind, and we'll continue with that, but now more applied. more how we bring this into our everyday life. And so after March 3rd, after Losar, which is the new moon, then we get into the full moon, and then we'll continue with this next second cycle. Today, which is the last one of these first year, it's about mind. And I couldn't have a better panel, or actually, if I could, I would have a woman with us as well. That would be, but other than that, it's a fantastic team. And we're going to be talking about self-transcendence, dissolving pain, and overcoming addiction. And I was thinking as I was reflecting in what's happening in the world that it couldn't be a better topic, particularly about self transcendence, overcoming pain, and addiction in many different ways, because addiction is not just kind of one way of thinking of addiction. And here, of course, we have Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, the founder of Cyber Sangha. I think everyone knows him, but I want to emphasize how important it is to have him, and that he's joining today from Pokhara, Nepal. And so hopefully we'll have him for the whole meeting. Depends on how electricity goes in Nepal. So we appreciate you being here at night, Rinpoche. Thank you so much. And joining us my name is Alejandro Chaoul. For those who don't know me, I'll be acting as the host. And joining us today are three great presenters and actually friends. And they're a great team. They're like the three amigos of working on the brain. And so Eric Garland is a distinguished endowed chair in research and distinguished professor, associate dean for research at University of Utah at the College of Social Work. He's the director of mindfulness and integrative health intervention development, associate director of integrative medicine and supportive oncology, and survivorship at the Huntsman Cancer Institute, and at the VA Medical Center in Salt Lake City in Utah. He has developed a really innovative mindfulness-based healing intervention, which derives from insights from cognitive, affective, and neurobiology science. But also he has this more interest in the non-duality practice that we'll talk about, bringing from practices like the ones that we do in the Ligmincha community of Dzogchen, but also Mahamudra and Kashmiri Shaiva Tantra. He has incredible expertise also in the clinical research, and he's a licensed psychotherapist, and for more than 15 years, clinical experience working with people suffering with addictive behaviors, mood disorders, traumatic stress, chronic pain, and psychosomatic conditions. So welcome, Eric. It's great to have you here. Together with Eric, we have Fadel Zeidan. And Fadel Zeidan is an associate professor of anesthesiology at the University of California in San Diego. And he's the co-founder and neuroscience director of the newly formed UC San Diego Psychedelic Health and Research Initiative. His research is focused on determining the active mechanisms that mediate the relationship between the self-regulatory practice of health and health. And Fadel is particularly interested in examining the brain mechanisms that are involved in relationship between mindfulness-based meditation and pain. The Zeidan Lab, actually, a team have discovered these neural processes that support mindfulness meditation and mindfulness-based pain relief. So his team has demonstrated that mindfulness meditation is mechanistically distinct from, for example, a placebo, from distraction, from relaxation, and his current research aims to identify the mechanisms that support the modulation of self-referential processing by mindfulness and natural product-assisted therapies to cultivate well-being, empathy, and compassion. He has a TEDx presentation from 2016 about his discoveries relating to pain management. Fadel, welcome. Good to have you. And finally, but not least at all, Dave Vago, a good friend, and some of you have seen him in our talks before. And he's a research associate professor of psychology at Vanderbilt University, where he directs the Contemplative Neuroscience and Mind-Body Research Lab. He also maintains an appointment as a research associate at the Department of Psychiatry at Brigham and Women's Hospital at the Harvard Medical School. And he's a former research director of the Osher Center for Integrative Medicine at Vanderbilt. He's currently leads for holistic well-being company Round Glass. He's a Mind and Life Fellow and advisory board member for many integrative health and wellness initiatives, and founding member of the International Society for Contemplative Research, which I hope this new society continues to flourish. I really wish it well and hope to collaborate with you at all there too. So welcome you all. I mean, this is a welcome you to this space. And as many times I like to do, I like to hear a little bit, and our audience likes to hear a little about how you came to this. And I know we could, each of us, probably have a whole presentation of an hour, but we don't have that. Altogether, we'll probably have from now on another hour. So if you could be concise, but tell us some of the things that, as a human being, besides being all these titles behind you and all these great research that you have done, as a human being, what led you into these practices? And I guess I'll start with Eric.
Thanks, Ali. It's when we were in our moment of silence, I was actually thinking about all the web of causes and conditions that are shaping this world today and what brought us here into this space together. And of course, those paths, come from the past. They emanate out from the past as well. So it's an apt question. Really, I think I always had even as a child, I had a bent towards the mystical. That was just part of my nature as a human. And then early, I would say at the end of my adolescence, I had what I would consider a spiritual awakening. I had a transcendent experience in which I completely became absorbed in the absolute. And then I spent the next 10 years trying to sort that out and trying to understand what happened to me, and put it into the context of multiple spiritual traditions from around the world. And that obviously gave me a deep passion for understanding the nature of the human mind. I first tried to approach that from the perspective of psychology, but I found that model was really pretty impoverished. And so instead, I was actually motivated to become a healer, a therapist. And so I began working with people clinically, but trying to integrate the spiritual realizations that I had on a personal level, trying to integrate that into my work with patients. And at the time when I was doing this, this was still pretty uncommon. This was before the real huge surge in interest in mindfulness had begun to peak. And so there were not a lot of existing models of how to integrate meditation and spiritual based practices within psychotherapy. So I just started to try to figure it out myself, not only based on experimentation, but also based on ancient wisdom from various spiritual paths, and also through Western philosophies and neuroscientific models, trying to understand why do people suffer, and what are the processes, the healing processes that they need to overcome that. And so eventually I decided I wanted to become a scientist, and my scientific career really became focused on studying these applications of contemplative practices as a healing path, particularly as a treatment both for pain as well as for addiction. And the study of addiction has been a central feature of my career for the past 15 years. And I'm the developer of mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement, as you mentioned. So this is the therapy system that I crystallized out of all of this personal experience and research. And I think it has some unique features that I think would be interesting to talk about today as a group. So the last point I'll say is I finally come full circle now that I'm a distinguished professor. So that means I can talk about the weird stuff that I haven't been able to talk about for the past decade. I can talk about the things that originally motivated me on this path. For example, the experience of self-transcendence, of transcending the self and accessing the absolute as a healing pathway. But I can speak about this not only in terms of personal experience, but I can actually speak about the quantitative empirical effects of these states on health and on the brain. And now I have the data from multiple randomized controlled trials to do so and to speak about this with confidence. So, so that's what brings me here today, is full circle.
Wonderful. Oh, we're so excited, and as always, we find with most of our speakers that there is that personal interest, personal experience that brings you into this path, that then you put all your passion into it. Fadel?
Yes, Halai. Ale, thank you so much for that introduction. Very kind and thoughtful. And I think that you are definitely one of the amigos. And so grateful to be sharing space with all of you. Yeah, I guess similar to Eric, I just, was always curious about consciousness and death and the mysterious aspects of life. Waking up and then realizing what is this? Why are we here? What is this? And through different experiences, I caught moments and more extended moments, maybe periods of peace, where it made sense. And when it made sense, the self dissipates and all energy, vibration, feeling arises, and this notion of collective consciousness and oneness and love arise. And through different experiences, sitting, walking in nature, traveling the world, these things arise, sometimes with intention, sometimes without. And so I really was lucky and privileged enough to be born in a time where we could try to measure this. And I love biology. I love it. Like my father is a physician, and he was always dissecting things and reading about anatomy and physiology, and I was just completely in love with this. Maybe because I also love my father so much, there was this relation. And then how can we study this more as a science of philosophy? Or how can the philosophy change from the science and vice versa? And so this is why I am here. I feel incredibly lucky, incredibly privileged, and that I get to say that I do this for a life work. It doesn't feel like work. And hopefully with this, we can subjectively, personally, and objectively as a community come together to closer appreciating what is the truth and how can we share that with people so that we could alleviate suffering. So that's my intention.
Thank you, Fadel. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think for most of us here, that is what it doesn't seem like work, right? Even though it is, and we love this, and that's why we can be at every time. And like Rinpoche being up at night doing these dialogues as well. So, and I just want to say, I also my path started with this aspect about thinking and experiencing death, and how kind of find those moments of peace. So we'll talk more. Dave, welcome.
Wow. I also feel very privileged to be here with you all today. Thank you, Rinpoche, for sharing your time with us. And it's always a pleasure to be in dialogue with you from your perspective, and to hear from the Bon tradition, and how we can make sense of it as scientists, as scholars, as academics, to translate some of the wisdom that came from your tradition come from the Buddhist traditions, but also, all the wisdom and contemplative traditions that are out there that are sort of capturing the essence of what motivates us in life. And just listening to my brothers, Fadel and Eric, talk about their motivations, we all resonate with this similar kind of ideas. I too have, I basically mirror what they experience, growing up in my life as well. And the mysteries of the mind and how the brain works. I've always thought of the brain as the most, I had an early mentor that once said, the brain is the greatest organ in the human body. Why would you want to study any other organ? And I said, yeah, that's right. That's right. But I'm a little bit less brain centric than I used to be. But I do believe, that the brain is a very important organ to study. And so I've focused much of my life trying to learn everything I can about the brain, how it works. And that really led me to neuroscience, and getting a degree in neuroscience and focusing on how understanding how the brain works can help reduce suffering. I became a practitioner of meditation from S.N. Goenka's Vipassana early on as a young college student back in the 90s. And that also started to orient me in a very particular direction of inquiry into my own experience. And that experience has been profoundly influential in how I understand the neuroscience. It really directs some of the questions that I ask. And this idea of transcendence, where we can experience the union with something greater than ourselves, has been one of the major motivating forces. Of course, as we're alluding to, it's been really hard to measure. So I think we're finally at a point where we can say that there's some aspects of this idea of transcending the self that can be finally measured. And that's what gets me very excited. But I've spent, my time not only trying to develop my skills as a neuroscientist and, in the context of clinical neuropsychiatry at Cornell and Harvard, all these like big institutions who want to focus on what are the best healing modalities. And so now meditation over the last 20 years has become a focus. And surprisingly, I think the three of us, when we were all graduate students, there was not a big emphasis on meditation as a healing modality. You wouldn't see it in psychiatry departments, but today you do. So only in 20 years has things shifted, and we were just coming up in the beginning of this field because of our natural curiosity. But so now I'm really glad just to be right here in this moment where we can talk about it, think about it not only on the scale of from the in a humanistic level where it can help humanity, but from the individual level. And I think there's some perspectives that both Fadel and Eric can provide from the research that they've done in pain and addiction that's uniquely talks to this idea. So I'm just really excited about this concept. In 2012, almost 10 years ago, I wrote a paper that focused on self-awareness, self-regulation, and self-transcendence as a sort of holistic model, integrative model for how mindfulness can transform the self. And so I think this is a really nice point of convergence where we can sort of talk about it from the Buddhist perspective and from the Western scientific one. So really glad to be here. Thank you, Ali, for bringing this together.
Sure. Thank you, Dave. Always good to see you. And I was just thinking about the brain being the main organ, as your professor said. I was co-teaching with Menpa Punzo Wamo, a Tibetan doctor, on the weekend, and she said from Tibetan medicine, heart is king. So we can talk and maybe about mind where that is, and particularly with this aspect of self-transcendence, right? You all are working brain, maybe to overcome brain, right? So which brings us to Rinpoche. I wanted to see, of course, if you wanted to talk a little bit about how you came into this interest of your own from the meditation into research, but maybe start talking already about this topic of self-transcendence if you want.
You can hear me okay, because time to time I don't hear. It becomes very fuzzy when you guys are speaking. So hopefully everything is okay. I did try to tell my hotel 4 days ago to please make sure that this session, and every day they said they will do it. No worry, no problem, no problem, no problem. And in the end they said, oh, this and that. So hopefully it will be fine. So in generally, like a Dharma teaching in general, any spiritual tradition, I think end of the day, it is about self-transcending. It is about overcoming all the pain. It is about being free from any pain identity. I think that seems like the core for everybody, So, and even though sometimes different traditions then kind of loses the focus of that, it becomes more like an attachment, ideas and identity, religious identity, philosophical identity, But I think I'm always curious and interested more, really, like the overcoming of the pain identity and transcending self and overcoming addictions, and as a collective wisdom that everybody has, regardless of your believer or not believer, or believing in one or the other, but at the end of the day it just comes to the same place. Drinker or any kind of addiction you think about, you're identifying with something with that, and that your identity is only, it seems like it's affecting when you begin to realize that the addiction start to dissolve by itself, because nobody's focusing on it, and that's true to every spiritual tradition. I think that's probably true to every psychotherapy, and particularly those who have more, better psychotherapy. Anyway, that's my interest. So I don't want to, since this is my Facebook here, I don't want to talk too much here. I would like to give most of the space to our speakers and guests here. So,
thank you, Rinpoche, and yes. So this concept of, for all of our guests and speak, of pain identity and how it kind of narrows, right? It's probably exactly the opposite of self transcendence, right? And how we get hooked into these, and those are these addictions, right? So let's talk a little bit about what is self transcendence, and actually, can we operationalize it, right? Can we actually make a way of methods that we can help us self-transcend? And then maybe, as some of you were saying too, can we experience it in everyday life after that? So in a way, it's kind of what we do in practice, right? So we sit to have a method of practice, but the idea is that what we get into that space of mind in that practice, we can bring it outside of the cushion, right? Post meditation, what we call. And so how do we get into that self-transcendence, and what are the methods that you have looked at, each of you, if you want to share? So again, we'll start with Eric and we'll go around.
Thank you. Well, I want to build on the last point of the identification, the pain identity and the addiction identity as the opposite of self-transcendence. So from a clinical perspective, you hear this from patients all the time. I am somebody with chronic pain. I am an addict. So the identity, the I am, is fused with this form of suffering. And it's something that people say to themselves consciously and unconsciously tens, hundreds, thousands of times a day, over and over again in their mind without even realizing it. I am pain. I am addiction. That's really what they're telling themselves. In some sense, it's almost a hypnotic suggestion, if you will. that really binds the sense of identity with this form of suffering. But of course, that's not who the person is, right? The person is the entire panoply of experience in the present moment, their entire life history, and all of their relations that they touch in the present and extending in all directions. But the person is self-identified with this narrow band of experience. So transcendence is the opposite movement. It's the movement, the widening of the aperture of awareness. As it expands, it encompasses more and more of life experience. And that experience is not constrained within, as Alan Watts used to say, the skin encapsulated ego. That's the artificial line that we draw, including the brain. We delimit consciousness from within the brain. But of course, I mean, these guys all know we're all the acolytes of Varela, Francisco Varela. So even from an inactive perspective, there is no consciousness without the contact between the self and the world. And it's actually the transfer or the transmission of energy through the world embodied in the self, which actually allows the self to navigate and act and know. And so even from a purely biological perspective, like what Francisco was talking about, knowledge and action occurs through the interconnectedness of the whole pattern. And we just falsely identify that with a limited self. But in reality, it really is the movement of the whole. So that's one operationalization of transcendence. At least certainly that's more of the relational form of self-transcendence, which is the sense of oneness with all things. But there's also an annihilational dimension of self-transcendence, which is the aspect, the absolute, which goes beyond multiplicity entirely, and may be characterized as paradoxically as an emptiness and a fullness, and the self is a vacuum. So those are operationalizations. How do we measure it? That's up to debate. A very simple way is just to ask people, tell me about your experience, and then try to quantify it using psychometrics, which is really how we measure most things from a psychological perspective. And my lab has done that. We've developed tools to do that. They're very crude. They're very imperfect, but nonetheless, they're sensitive enough to map on to both changes in the brain and as well as improvements in health. So I'm happy to talk more about that, but I don't want to take all the air here.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Eric. Fadel, how do you, practice or, think of self-transcendence? What are ways that you have operationalized it, and and this idea you already mentioned before of this experience that of your own experience, that sometimes it's not necessarily on the cushion, that it's you're walking in nature and so forth. So if you want to talk a little more about that.
Yeah, thanks. I am less of an expert on. I don't think I'm an expert of anything, quite frankly, but I don't know how to operationalize self-transcendence. I don't know how to define it. I don't know if self-transcendence is bliss. I don't know, because to me that's a form of an elated experience. I don't know if self-transcendence is non-dual awareness of a complete diminishment or uncoupling of self. I don't know. And what I can tell you is something that Eric alluded to, is that our participants in our studies tell us how they feel, and they say they feel less attached Okay, these are Americans, these are Westerners. They feel less attached to the emotion, to the feeling. But I'm here to learn. I don't know about this term. I know about it from my readings, but I don't know how to apply it and measure it. I'm hoping to learn from that. For me, I still don't know. Because I tell you what, and maybe maybe you guys can help me with this, is that sometimes when I dip into those non-dual states, the recognition of the decoupling of self wakes me up and says, oh, that's self-recognition again. And then I have to start over. So I'm never, until I completely let it go. So I'm a mess, quite frankly. I'm glad this is being recorded. But I am your student, and I surrender to Dave.
Thank you, Fadel. Thank you. And we'll talk then more specifically about maybe even if it's not total self-transcendence, transcending pain, for example, and things like that, that where you are more of an expert. So,
a little easier to translate for me. Yes.
Great. Dave?
Fadel is very humble. He said something really key, I believe, is that he said that his subjects, his participants in his studies feel less attached when they experience pain. And I think there's a really important point to that. And I've heard him talk about how certain aspects of self-referential processing related to experiencing one's own body, one's own experience, has decoupled from the brain activity that is relevant or associated with processing the self. So there's something really deep and rich in Fadel's work that directly speaks to this idea of non-attachment, the experience of unity with all things, or flow states. And we can talk about some of how different aspects of just a positive emotion like awe or flow or just a sense of beauty that can also capture what is in essence self-transcendence. It could be fleeting. It doesn't have to mean that you have some experience that is so profound that it changes your disposition for your entire lifetime, and you can consider yourself awakened or enlightened. It could be just something very ordinary, right? I think we can make the distinction between an ordinary experience of self-transcendence and something maybe extraordinary, right? But if I could take a moment to just back up a bit and say, well, what is it about? What are we transcending here? What is the self that we're transcending? And that helps us understand why we do transcend the self and why that may be a positive experience or a therapeutic experience. When we think about ourselves, our needs, our wants, our fears, our attitudes, our expectations, our values, our self-image, there is a sort of self-identity that we all sort of gravitate to. Who is, Fadel Zeidan? Who is Eric Garland? Who is Rinpoche? Are we really just an accumulation of experiences that define us? And one way to see it from a neurobiological point of view, I've talked about how we can take ourselves as really just a string of moments, the cycles of mental habits and dispositions that are self-conditioned, self-perpetuated through repetition, continually informing our present state of awareness, the coloring our memory of the past, just sort of the imagined future. All of that creates ourselves. And if we think about breaking down ourselves into this string of moments, say 500 milliseconds, we can say that in each 500 millisecond moment, there's an element of perception, there's an element of sensory awareness, and there's an element of cognitive evaluation of the world. And that you can string those moments together. And, if you're in your 40s, you can basically say that you've had, maybe, 3 billion moments to become the person who you are today from where you were when you started as a baby. Right. So there's the self, right? If we think about it in that way, then we can say you can have certain types of emotions or thoughts like what Eric was alluding to, this idea that, I am my pain, or I'm not good enough, or I am, sort of attaching yourself to those, experiences. Well, I'm stressed out, I am burned out, and I am addicted. And if I have chronic pain, or if I have a substance dependency, and you start fueling your mind with those particular thoughts, we think of that as reifying the self, like crystallizing our identity as that entity, that I am a pained person. And it teaches your body to experience, well, I am pain, I am experiencing pain, so I must be pain. And it shows up in your body in very, very dramatic ways in terms of inflammatory pathways and how it's toxic to your body. And then your thoughts, your emotion is dysregulated. So if we're going to transcend anything, we have to realize what it is that we're transcending. It's the self identity that may have led to having destructive types of emotions. And one of the mechanisms that we've talked about, at least in the meditation science tradition, is meta-awareness, for example. And in meta-awareness, we often talk about how there is this element of de-reification, where we're taking the self and untangling it to see the habits, to get insight into our own mental habits, to see how they truly act, right? And transcend them in some way. And this idea of training your awareness to disidentify from the internal experience also helps you reduce the reactivity to those thoughts. So if I am my pain, or I am not good enough, just becomes a thought out here, right? Rather than it is me. And that process, that distancing, is an element of transcending the self, right? And so when we talk about defining transcendence, there are many ways that people have defined it, whether it's hypoegoic states, or transpersonal experience, or religious experience, or spiritual experience, anomalous experience, non-dual awareness. But then there's also this experience of awe, right, or flow, that people get lost in the moment. And so we can talk a little bit about how, there's certainly this element of unification that you feel with all things. There's an element of annihilation, that the self identity is just maybe made up of an illusion of just thoughts and patterns of thoughts and emotions that you've had throughout your lifetime, right? And then we could talk about something even more beautiful, which is something that Fadel also referred to in the beginning, which was being in nature, that the feeling of awe. Or when you're listening to a Trey solo, that feeling of being connected to people around the world who are also in that same place, listening to music, can be ultimately a transcendent experience as well. So I think we can take the word self-transcendence out of the context of just being on, in a cave in Nepal necessarily, right? And put it into the everyday person and say, have you had an experience that is beyond oneself, that is completely immersed, that feels unified with the people around you, dissolving the boundaries between yourself and others? That's an experience I think we can all relate to, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to just put that out there.
Yeah, thank you. And this idea of the reifying self is really what Rinpoche was talking about, the pain identity, right? Because we identify into these and we act in those ways, right? The other aspect that is interesting as the de-reifying and the taking distance, as you said, it might not be total self-transcendence, but it's already going into that direction. And something that Rinpoche, as we do in the Three Doors, is this kind of transformations. Now, it'll be interesting, and I'd like to leave this idea for a little later because I want to come to Rinpoche, but this idea that you mentioned, that even these moments of de-identifying or of being able to be in that state of mind, don't they actually maybe have a cascade effect? That it's not just this fleeting moment, that actually do have an effect, that it's even, and I'll ask Fadel about this, into the biology of our body. So I'd like to come to that. But I wanted to come to Rinpoche, and Rinpoche on I mean, as you put together the three doors, and you really talked about the pain identity and the being able to understand that, to then transform, and whether we call it self-transcendence, or just being in a better place. If you want to talk a little bit more about that, that might help in this dialogue.
Sure. Sure. So when I was speaking, was you guys can hear okay? Okay, good.
Yes, mostly okay, Rinpoche.
Okay.
Yes.
So the idea of self-transcendence and overcoming pain and being free from addiction. So I think this is kind of main themed topic here. So first of all, I think we all I think the three door is very much based on identity. I think Buddhism, whole Buddhist teaching is very much based on identity. So identity, whole idea of no self is basically whatever you're identifying, that's not who you are. No self, basically, that's what it means. Whatever you're identifying with, you are not that. You don't have to identify with anything to be someone or to be. You don't have to be anyone to be. So that I think is the kind of basic concept there, right? Say I'm sick, and there are people they really identify with that. When you talk with them, they wanted to be sick. They wanted to, especially when they said, "Now I have insurance, now I can get sick." Before they have insurance, they don't get sick. After they have insurance, then they get sick, right? So the identity is saying now it's okay, I can get sick. I am sick, but I wanted to be well. But if you really wanted to the only way to heal and transcend from the sickness, to not identify with the sickness in an extreme way. And of course, sometimes when we are sick, we say, I'm sick. But it's different than when you're really, really deep inside identifying with it. Or somebody says, there are some people searching for themselves all the time, always searching. They're in the search mood 24 hours, 24/7. And when you ask them, who are they? They said, I'm lost. Of lost. They would say, I'm lost. I'm lost in my job situation. I'm lost within this relationship. I'm lost in, I don't know who I am. They would have even dreams, like a sense of being lost all the time. But at the same time, they're searching. They're always in a searching mood. So in a sense, it makes sense. They're searching all the time because they're identifying with the lost. But what they have to understand is, in order to have some glimpse of a sense of knowing who of lost, but at least take a break from the identity of lost. Sometimes that's what I tell my students. Okay, let's forget about transcending something. Let's forget about going beyond something. Let's take a break. So, or another word, these are many different things. Alcoholic. I'm alcoholic, but I'm trying to overcome alcohol. Alcohol. You can get rid of alcohol, but it's hard. Person can always find alcohol. It can find it. And sometimes people say I don't have money and I don't have a home, but they can find alcohol no matter what they don't have. They find a where they sell, where they find the money for it. And I don't know how they afford it even. But alcoholic person can do it. Or even in the sense of, I really wanted to be happy, but I am unhappy. You identify with, you say, I'm unhappy. Mantra they recite, I'm unhappy. They tell everybody unhappy, especially people, loved one, especially good close friends. They will just say, I'm unhappy. Of course, the therapy, they can say that, but not to everybody. You meet somebody in the bar and say, I'm happy. And you go through, tell all your unhappy stories. Nobody's interested to hear your unhappy story because they have their own one, But I'm seeking happiness. So you cannot find happiness unless you stop. At least for the sake of fun or humor, you can say, I'm happy. I don't know what that means. Since I've been saying all my life, I'm unhappy, I am just changing my language. I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy. I've been happy, but I don't know why I said I'm unhappy. If you even begin to say the word used that again and again, I'm sure it will make some differences. But not only when you say those identity, confirming those identity within yourself, not only probably you're in the brain, your heart, your all the cells in your body, but I do really believe sometimes unhappy people, when somebody's complaining a lot to you, saying I'm unhappy and I'm telling all unhappy stories, you can kind of feel the surrounding people will also start to behave differently. They start to say, this is unhappy person. I don't want to destroy this unhappy person. In order to save this person, protect this person, it doesn't have to lose its sense of self and identity. And if people in maybe unconsciously begin to support unhappiness to unhappy person because that's who they are. They don't want to destroy who they are. So I think there's a sense of identity. I say it's really like a big issue even in a very practical sense. If you wanted to be happy, change the vocabulary, change the attitude. If you wanted to don't get lost. If you want to be found, don't say I am lost. It again and again and again unconsciously. And sometimes we all know friends, and some friends they will always say that okay again. You don't want to remind them they just said that again, but you are fully aware they did said that again, right?
Thank you, Rinpoche. Yeah, this is really important. The kind of the frame of mind, this aspect of de-reifying, and I want to move into how are those spaces, how are those states of mind of when we're able to detach from that, to de-reify, and maybe already start touching into some of the things that Dave was saying about awe and beauty, but maybe even this idea of savoring, because I think that supports that state of mind of being able to be in this other state of mind, even if we are just at the beginning, almost like fake it till you make it, right? This, yes, I feel unhappy, but I'm going to say I'm happy. I am happy, and start changing until we change. So if you can share some of the research that you've done in this area, some of your experiences, because I think this will be very useful for the audience. So, and again, I guess we'll start with Eric.
Yes, I'd love to. So, so many things to comment on here, but with respect to the last point about savoring, in mindfulness-oriented recovery enhancement, we teach people who are suffering from opioid addiction and chronic pain. We teach them mindfulness practices, and we also teach them how to use mindfulness to savor natural beauty, whether it's the beauty of a walk in the woods, or the beauty of a sunset, or the beauty on the face of a smiling baby. We teach them to focus attention deeply onto that experience and to savor the pleasant sensory features of the experience, as well as to savor the positive emotions that arise in the mind and body as they encounter this experience. And when the positive emotions and pleasant sensations in the mind and body arise, we instruct patients to turn their attention inward and to savor the inner positive feeling, the inner bliss, if you will, which is essentially consciousness reflecting back upon its own blissful nature and allowing the mind to rest in that space. And so, and then the patient is taught to oscillate back and forth between savoring the object and then savoring their own conscious response to the object. And I do believe that savoring contact between the subject and the object, savoring contact between the self and the world, savoring the point of contact is actually a very special practice, because it allows one to recognize the deep interconnectedness and unity between the self and the world at the point of contact with the object. And I'd be very interested in hearing Rinpoche's perspective on that. But from a scientific perspective, what we have found, and this relates to Dave's comment about flow. So what we found, we brought people into the lab who we trained in this technique, and we asked them to meditate while we recorded EEG activity in the brain. We found that after 8 weeks of training in this therapy that combines mindfulness and savoring, we found an increase in frontal midline theta oscillations in the brain. And frontal midline theta oscillations are well known to be a biomarker of cognitive control. So when you are deeply focused and deeply absorbed in a task to the point at which you cannot be distracted, because absorption is so deep and total, theta is known to arise, and theta is known to actually subserve that function of becoming deeply focused and absorbed in flow. It's also interesting, and this will connect to something that I think Fadel will talk about later, which is frontal midline theta, as it increases, activity in the default mode network of the brain decreases. As we become deeply cognitively absorbed and focused in a task, our sense of self, our self-referential processing in the brain is suspended. So we found that this training in mindfulness and savoring practices increases this frontal midline theta oscillation. And the degree to which the frontal midline theta increases correlates with self-transcendent experiences of oneness with the universe, the sense of unity between the self and the world, and the sense that the self is dissolving into emptiness. So the more that patients report having these types of experiences as they meditate, the more powerful the frontal midline theta oscillations increase in the brain. And the more powerfully these frontal midline theta oscillations increase in the brain, the less patients misuse opioids, the greater the reduction in opioid use they are able to achieve. So clearly these experiences, these self-transcendent experiences, have therapeutic value. They enable people to actually free themselves from addictive behavior and from pain. And we've shown correlations between reports of self-transcendence and reductions in chronic pain severity in these patients as well. But I think it all is hinged around this, at least at the level of the novice practitioner. And I think at the level of a Jivan Mukta, or of a Bodhisattva, we may be talking about a different phenomena. But at the level of a novice, learning how to become deeply focused and absorbed in a moment of beauty, like Dave was talking about, whether it's a gorgeous guitar solo at a beautiful concert, or whether it's seeing the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, learning how to become deeply absorbed in that moment of beauty allows this sense, the sense that was a sense of self that was reified and attached to the pain identity, for example, or the addiction identity. It allows it to be suspended, and then consciousness makes contact with the world. And in that moment, that unification of consciousness with the world, it's a healing force.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. Yeah, Fadel, I was thinking, in your work with pain, and there's also this other way of, even if we don't call transcendence, transcending that pain, whether it's a knee osteoarthritis pain or whether it's another pain, a bigger pain, a more emotional pain. if you want to talk a little bit about that. And I think you, if I remember well, you're also interested in how in their practice, it's not just the cognitive, but the breathing, how that can help in that as well. So if you want to mention any of that.
Sure. Yeah, I will try to be brief, but comprehensive. We just finished 3 experiments that took a couple of years to complete. And so the work I will discuss is not published yet. It's under review in the scientific journal. So I'm happy to discuss these. And in one particular study we just finished, we used this technique called functional magnetic resonance imaging, functional MRI, which is a big MRI scanner that measures blood flow by using a big magnet to measure the iron in your blood and where that iron goes in one activity versus another. So something that we're very interested in is teaching people, oh no, we lost our dear colleague.
Yeah, he'll probably come back,
He's already self-transcending his way here.
Yeah, he transcended.
It's fine. So the idea here is we study pain. Welcome back, sir. We study pain to understand consciousness. Pain is made up of this interaction of constellations between the sensory, the cognitive, the emotional, the same dimensions of our moment-to-moment conscious experience. And using different techniques, we could pull apart the sensory, the cognitive, the emotional, the whole, the memory, the fear. And so we could try to get sophisticated this way. So we combine painful heat with meditation, shamatha, vipassana, and brain imaging. And we want to really understand, how does mindfulness reduce pain? Not if it does, of course it does. Placebo works, sugar pills work. That's not difficult. We want to understand, is there something different about the way meditation relieves pain? And so we did a functional connectivity study, which allows us to see which brain circuits, which brain regions are communicating with each other to reduce pain. So in the results of this, we found that using very strong analyses, that the brain region, the thalamus, one of the most oldest, ancient, critical brain regions for our existence, is responsible for all the information that comes from the body, has to go through the thalamus to get to the brain. It's the gate. Except for what? The sense of smell. Okay? That activates different neural system through the olfactory, through the nose. The rest has to go through the thalamus. And so this area, this gate, allows us to feel pain, which is very important, by the way. We have to be in pain to survive. If not, you're not going to make it. What we found was that meditation decouples the brain regions that are associated with the thalamus of pain and evaluation of self-value. The precuneus. This is an area that uses the most energy in the brain. It's almost like the conductor. It brings all the information into one stream of consciousness to manifest and how it relates to self. So we found that meditation reduced pain by stopping the communication of the old thalamus to this new area of the brain that processes self. We did another analysis, and we found the same thing with another area of the brain that's in the front that's involved with self-value, what something means to you. And that, the more that turned off, the more that meditation worked to reduce pain. So in brief, what we're showing is that the 2 major areas that process self, what the sensory, cognitive, emotional experience means to me, the more that deactivates during meditation, the greater the pain relief. And so basically what's happening is the appraisal of experience is being diminished. More so, it's not only that the pain is going away, it's not that really. It's just that the pain doesn't bother them. They're aware of the experience, but the attachment of the emotion, the reflexive reaction, ouch, how long is this going to last? When is this over? Oh my goodness, this hurts. That cycle slows down or stops. And the more that it does in the brain, the more the pain relief. That's physical pain. And now I love this story because it's really similar to the anatta of uncoupling of self from experience. As Rinpoche said, this is not me. And that's what's happening. And then we just finished an experiment. See, I transcended this phone call. Another study we just finished, and I'll be brief about this. We recruited parents that lost their child to a gun in a classroom. This is a problem in America, not so much in the rest of the world. I don't know what's wrong with this place, but kids are not safe at schools. And the parents that lost their children, as you can imagine, it's the worst trauma that can happen to the human condition, probably, is to lose a loved one, a child, especially in the context of a classroom where they are supposed to be in a safe space for education. And someone takes and rips that away. Now, the parents, of course, they're very depressed. They don't want to lose the grief. They don't want to stop mourning the child. You say, you have to get better. You have to find a way to be less depressed. To the parents, you have to get better. This is no way to live. For them, getting better means forgetting the child. Meditation can be a way to find healing where you could still hold the energy of the grief, but let go, transcend the suffering. So we ran a meditation intervention for 8 weeks of training, and we found that in these people, the worst trauma that you could experience, we found a 72% reduction in depression, a 60% reduction in trauma. Grief, same thing. There's a lot of problems with this experiment. I don't need to get into it right now, but what it shows is that you can use yourself to even alleviate the most severe trauma that a human can experience. And if we can make people in that space feel better, to carry that energy for something positive, then we can do anything. So I will yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And this is what Rinpoche always teaches in terms of the meditation as a place of hosting. It's not pushing away that pain, but it's able to host and be with it. And so, as you say, it's not that we don't feel it, right? It's just that we are able to be with that suffering in whatever form. And
awareness is everything, to be aware is number one. First, awareness. What is this? Okay, now what are you going to do with that awareness? And that's part of the process for especially Westerners, is they say, I can't do this. My mind is too busy. I can't quite. If you can recognize how busy your mind is, you're doing a great job. That's step one.
Thank you for that. Dave, wondered if you wanted to go a little further in this aspect of awe and beauty that you mentioned, or whatever part of whatever you want to share in this space now at this moment.
Thank you. We have to just reiterate what Eric and Fadel have just shared, because the results are pretty incredible. Just to reiterate, this finding that Eric had with frontal midline theta, which is correlated with cognitive control and being really focused and in the flow in a meditative state, being highly correlated with not only this idea of self-transcendence, being unified and having those experience of being out of the self, or really disembodied from oneself, and focusing on the savoring aspect of something positive is critical to this idea that we keep talking about, de-reification, right? So if the self has become reified as the I am lost, right? As Rinpoche was saying, he has colleagues who say, I'm lost, I'm always searching for myself, I'm lost, right? Or I am pain, I am in pain, or I am hopeless, or I am depressed, or I'm not good enough. Any of these types of thoughts, we know there's great work by Aaliyah Crum and Carol Dweck, who focuses on mindset, right? And how mindset can completely change your outcomes, your health outcomes. Why is it that health outcomes change depending on just your orientation towards your experience, right? So you can say, I have a stress debilitating mindset, and I think stress is something that's bad. It's going to hurt me. It's really unfortunate. I try to avoid it. Or you can have a stress is enhancing mindset, which really refers to this idea that you have the resources to manage a stressor, and you see it as a challenge, right? That changes outcomes dramatically. In fact, they've seen people who have up to 70% increased risk of dying prematurely if you just think that stress is debilitating in your life. It just leads to negative health outcomes. So the idea that Eric is showing that people are not using opiates as much with just savoring and experiencing this self-transcendent, experience phenomenologically, right, is a piece of the puzzle here of how we can untangle the self, de-reify, and reconsolidate the self into a more adaptive trajectory. And then Fadel's work specifically is showing that if they're able to decrease the evaluation, the constant self-reflective processing that people do to reify those negative self-perceptions, then that decoupling is another therapeutic mechanism to experience pain in a different way. I always love when Fadel talks about the story of Thich Quang Duc. I'll just bring it up briefly. This is the Vietnamese Buddhist monk who set himself on fire in protest of the government of South Vietnam. And when you look at his image of being on fire in ultimate protest, right, to sacrifice his self, his whole body, in protest of how the government was treating the people of Vietnam, he is composed, sitting silently in meditation. I think he's doing a mantra to Amitabha, which is from his tradition, Buddha of infinite light. But he's immersed in flames. How is he able to distance himself from that pain, right? And it's that evaluative aspect that really helps uncouple it. So I just wanted to say one other piece of the puzzle here, which is some of the work that we've done in my lab was looking at attentional bias. And Eric's done some of this work too. And the idea here is that our view, our perception of the world that happened. Remember, I said if our world is a string of 500 millisecond moments, a quarter of that moment in 250 milliseconds is unconscious. We're not aware of what our mind is doing and how it orients to the world. And what we find is that when you're reified into this sort of self-deprecating, stress is debilitating kind of mindset, or I'm lost, whatever your negative mindset is, your perception is biased. It's distorted. We don't even realize, but under our conscious awareness, we are oriented in a way that avoids a lot of the types of experiences that we feel are debilitating. And that avoidance can be measured through electrophysiology and ERP kinds of tasks. And what we found, and Eric has done the same, and we've just found it with using electrophysiology just recently, that you can change those biases, how your brain responds to negative experiences, it actually changes. Instead of avoiding, we have this hypervigilant avoidant model of pain and suffering, that we are very vigilant. People who have chronic pain typically are very vigilant towards the environment for anything that's pain related, and then they avoid it without even knowing that they can do that, without knowing that they do that. And what we found was that by doing mindfulness practice, it changes your biases. Your biases are no longer avoiding. You're actually more likely to engage with the object of your pain and just accept it, be aware of it. Like Fadel saying, awareness is key. We've talked about how meta-awareness is a key process by which meditation works to help provide a safe distance between you and your thoughts. And so that's where I really, and we can go back to Eric's original question for you, Rinpoche, is, what is it about changing that mindset? Because you're saying, just change the vocabulary, right? Change the vocabulary. That's not easy for people to just change the vocabulary, saying, well, don't say I'm lost anymore. Say, I'm found or I'm awake. But it's not easy for people to do explicitly. And it almost seems like in order to change these sort of implicit habits of our mind, we have to nurture them in some way. And Eric, I think you provide this really great example of savoring, where you sit with something that's positive. And so maybe Rinpoche, you could also talk a little bit about how that experience of sitting in savoring of something that could be beautiful, something that provides awe and beauty, can be helpful to de-reify that self and move yourself into that more positive selfing process. I'm really curious your thoughts on that, but hopefully that was helpful.
Thank you, Dave. Yes, Rinpoche, I'm glad that you were able to come back.
Yeah. So I hope you're hearing me okay, because sometimes I'm losing all of you. So I'm hearing parts of it, not everything. So, well, as we said earlier, that if we identify saying I'm unhappy, or I am lost, or I am sick, or I am alcoholic, this identity that we identify opposite. I wanted to be found. I wanted to know who I am. I wanted to be healed. I wanted to be happy, and so we do that, right? So I think in the meditation, if you look at the meditation in general, one of the things we talk about is like a concentration practice, like a shine practice, right? Calm abiding practice. So the calm abiding practice is just basically telling you to focus on an object sharp enough, clear enough, and focus strong enough, not only with your mind, but your senses, with your eyes, your postures, gaze, the breath, and strong enough so that it somehow takes the break from that identity. It basically that some sense of that identity is able to take some kind of break from that, or even in better, that sometime when you go deep and rest in the calm abiding deep enough, so that you kind of loses all the, you're no longer identifying with those lost or pain or unhappiness, because you are fully rested enough. So in the meditation, most of the time what we do is like basically saying, I usually say take a break, or take a break. It basically means we say be how you do it. We do very, very specific methods. We say we talk about 3 precious pills. Be awareness of the stillness of the body. That if you are aware of stillness of the body, that helps. If you're aware of the silence of your speech, that means the mantra, I am sick, I'm sick, I'm sick, I'm sick, I'm not well, I'm not well, I'm not well, I'm unhappy, I'm lost, I'm lost. This, that these are called pain speech, inner dialogue, pain speech. When you hear it, the role of awareness, when you hear it, you can say, well, this is too much, Even I'm lost, why I have to say that many times, right? So you just take a break from that. And when you're aware of it, more likely you are able to take a break. But sometimes for some people, even they are some degree they are aware of it, they're not able to take a break because it just keeps on continuously. And why they keep on continuously? Because they are not able to be like they're not able to be aware in a sense of more pure awareness, but they're rationalizing, they're using a logic. Logic is playing a more important role in their mind. I'm unhappy because I'm angry at you because you said that. And in a way, I mean, any relationship, it's very interesting, very, very fascinating personally for me. I mean, I watch my own relationship with the children, right? Child upbringing, children. It's very interesting, like you whatever reasons that you upsets you, you have a reason, logic. The logic does not has to be the reason to be upset. Logic can be reason to be happy. The logic sometimes is wrong. Like this story about the two British guy goes to Africa to, they said, do some research and analysis that they wanted to sell his shoes. So one guy reports back saying, forget about selling shoes in Africa, nobody wears shoes. The other one says, Africa is the best place to sell the shoes because nobody's wearing the shoes. The same logic. So you can use the same logic to be completely happy. You can use the same logic to be completely miserable. Logic has a perspective the way you look at the logic. But if you're stuck with the logic, defining one logic supposed to produce a specific effect all the time, same effect, then you're in trouble. So I mean, I think when we begin to use the logic, I mean, every day I mean, I just sometimes joke with my wife, and we live in Albany, and we go to city. We live in so close to San Francisco, and I like to go because of the city nearby. There is just to do something fun, go for dinner or something. But when every time I go, I don't like it to go there, and they get stuck in the traffic. Then I'm stuck in the traffic. Anybody should be happy? Why when you're stuck in the traffic? No, nobody's happy. But I'm happy. I tell my wife, I'm saying, you know what, I'm happy because thank God we don't have to do this every day. It's a reminder for us saying you don't have to go to the city. And we are so lucky, we are so happy that we don't have to do this every day. So traffic becomes the cause for your happiness, not your pain. If you use you come from the right identity, right perspective, and right logic, it makes you happy. Traffic becomes a good source of happiness. No one, but it is when you look at it one way.
Yeah. Thank you, Rinpoche. And as Eric was putting in our chat here, that's a positive reappraisal. So great. And I know we are coming to an end. I wish we could keep on talking. This is fascinating. So thank you, everyone. This has been great. And also, this is the last of this year. Rinpoche will be talking about stillness, the pillar of stillness. On Saturday, there's about the dance of stillness. And then March 3rd is our Losar, New Year, so there'll be different programs then. And then March 17th will be the full moon, and we start with this new time of the full moon, not the new time, sorry, but this new season of the whole year. And this one will be through stillness, awaken, clear, positive action. And then our dialogue, the first one of that year, will be on March 23rd, and we'll have Bessel van der Kolk, who's the author of When the Body Keeps Score, or The Body Keeps Score. So we'll start with the body again, then breath, then mind. So thank you, everyone here. Thank you, the audience. I wish that this helps for the world as well, and particularly in this troubling world and the what we've hearing, what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. And so hopefully our hearts and minds can be there and helping that as well. Thank you all for a
Thank you.
fantastic dialogue.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rinpoche.
Thank you for
Thank
the
you, Ale.
opportunity. Thank you, Rinpoche. Thank you, Ale.
And thank you,
Thank you,
Niles.
amigos.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Cyber Sangha podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Cyber Sangha, visit us online at cybersangha.net.